In this video, we will be talking about a compound interest. If you've already clicked on this video or found it on YouTube search or Google search, you've probably heard something about it. You probably know that compound interest is something that everybody recommends you to use, and everybody says that this is the way to get rich. So in this video, we will try to understand if it's true or not. So I will tell you about what a compound interest is, how to use it, when to use it, who should use it, how to calculate it, and we will even talk about the disadvantages of a compound interest, because there are some. So if you think that any of this information might be useful for you, please keep watching. Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Anastasia. On this channel I talk about investing, and especially investing for beginners. In today's video I will be telling you about a compound interest. A compound interest is a very useful and a very strong tool in investing that allows you to grow your wealth fast. Although at the beginning it might not seem like that. So if you want to know what a compound interest is, the first thing you do is probably Google it. And this is the definition of a compound interest that Investopedia gives us. A compound interest or compounding interest is the interest on a loan or deposit calculated based on both the initial principal and the accumulated interest from previous periods. It's not hard to understand, but you have to read twice to get the idea of this definition, and I always think that they use very difficult words. I don't know what for. So let me try to explain to you what a compound interest is in easy words. In easy words, a compound interest is interest on your interest. I mean, it still might sound a little bit confusing, but in my opinion it's not as confusing as the original definition. So in other words, if you invested $1,000 for a period of 5 years for 10% interest rate annually, the first year you will receive $100 of interest, and the next year this $100 of interest will be added to your initial investment, to your initial $1,000. So the next year you will receive 10% not just of $1,000 but of $1,100. And so on. The coolest thing about a compound interest is that the longer you use it, the longer your investment stays and uses the compound interest, the higher the returns are, because they tend to accumulate and it creates a snowball effect which helps your wealth grow massively the longer you keep investing. To understand the difference between a simple interest and a compound interest, all you have to do is to look at the numbers. To calculate a simple interest is relatively easy. To calculate the compound interest, you need to use the formula. This is it. This is a joke, right? I mean, guys, where are the numbers? There are no numbers, just letters. But luckily, you don't have to be a mathematician to understand this formula, because online there are a lot of compound interest calculators. You can use any of them to understand how quickly your investment will grow if you decide to use it. So first of all, let's look at the numbers of a simple interest. This is just one of the online calculators that I found. You can Google it yourself. It's easy, you will find a lot, and you can play with the numbers that suit your own situation. So for example, your starting balance is £1,000 and you invest this £1,000 into S&P 500 fund, which on average brings an annual return of around 7%. So the interest rate yearly is 7%. The period of time that you are going to hold this money for is 30 years. If we calculate, we see that at the end of 30 years you will receive £3,100. So your interest will be £2,100, which from the first sight is not that bad. And then you see the table of calculations, how much interest you receive in 2021. It's a little bit less because it is the middle of the year. And after that, every single year you receive £70 of interest. Now let's use the same numbers, but this time calculate the compound interest. So at the moment, just remember that we receive £3,100 at the end of our investment. Now, if we use the same numbers, but this time for a compound interest, so our initial deposit is the same, £1,000, and our interest rate is the same, 7% yearly, we invest for 30 years, and our compound interval is, for example, yearly. We don't do any more deposits and we don't do any withdrawals. At the end of the term, we will receive the total of £7,620. This return on investment is twice higher than the original sum that we saw when we were calculating just a normal, simple interest. And if we look down at the table, we see that the first year we received the same £70 of interest, but the second year we already received nearly £75 of interest. And if we scroll down over the 30 years, we see that in the 30th year we received nearly £500 of interest. So here the difference is very visible, 500 against original 70. This is where you actually see the difference very well. Let's look at some other interesting and fun details about a compound interest. Analyzing the audience, the people who watch my YouTube videos, I see that the majority of them are between 20 and 40 years old. So let's look at some other examples of what would happen and how much money you would receive back if you start investing with the compound interest at a certain age. For example, your goal of using a compound interest is getting ready for your retirement age so that you can travel when you retire and do in general whatever you want, and you start investing at the age of 20. When you are only 20 years old, the time is definitely on your side, but it is very hard to understand and in general start thinking about your retirement when you are 20. Another disadvantage of starting investing when you are 20 is that probably your financial situation is not as good as it will be when you are 40 or 50. So let's assume that at the age of 20 you can afford to put aside $100 or £100 every single month, and you don't have any initial sum, a bigger sum that you would like to invest. So your initial investment is only $100 because you don't have more than that, and your monthly contribution is still $100. Let's assume that you invest for 40 years because you want to retire at the age of 60. Of course, you want to retire as soon as possible, but you still have a long time before the majority of people will retire. Although saying that, probably those people who are 20 years old now will end up retiring not sooner than at the age of 70. That's just my personal opinion and my conclusion that I made by looking at what's going on in the world and in the UK in particular. But let's assume the best case scenario. Okay, so 40 years you will be investing $100 every month, and the estimated interest rate we will leave as 7%, assuming that you are investing into the S&P 500. Also, bear in mind that S&P 500 doesn't bring every single year a return of 7%. Sometimes it is more than that, sometimes it is less than that, sometimes you end a year at a loss. So 7% is only the historical average return that this fund has shown. So in 40 years, your total investment will be worth $241,000. And look at this graph. This is something that I really like, because the green line shows you the value of your total contributions. So only $100 per month at the end of 40-year period will bring you $48,000, $48 and $100. And the red line is the future value that includes your interest and your return. So you see how big a difference it is at the end. Imagine that you are a person who is 20 years old now and who puts $100 a month every single month, just keeping this money under their pillow or under their mattress, not knowing, not having this basic information about the compound interest. At the end of this period of time, this person will end up with less than $50,000 in their pocket, whilst the other person who's been clever about things and who has been using the compound interest all the time will end up with $250,000 by the age they decide to retire. Honestly, when I look at these numbers, there are two thoughts that appear in my head. First thought is, I wish I was 20. Actually, no, I'm 29 years old now, and I wish I literally started about 40 or 50 years ago. I would use the compound interest, and I know that my math doesn't make any sense, but I still wish I did. The second thought that comes to my head is, why we don't learn these things at school? I feel like I missed on so many opportunities and so much time because no one has ever told me about the compound interest and the power that compound interest gives me when I was at school. I was learning at school, I was learning at the university. I haven't heard about these things. Why? I learned so many different things that I don't use nowadays, and it took me all these years to get to this point where I have this information and I can share this information with you. And I hope that you hear this information and you actually listen to me, you actually understand what I mean. And I hope that you are younger than me, because that means that you have more opportunities, you have more time to use all the advantages of this super powerful financial tool that is so available to all of us nowadays. But please don't get too disappointed if you are already 40, 50, 60 years old and this is the first time you hear about the compound interest and you haven't used it before. Because although obviously you have less time now than when you were 20, hopefully your financial situation nowadays is much better than what you had when you were 20 years old, and on top of that you will most probably feel much more motivated nowadays than what you were when you were 20, because the older you are, the more you think about your retirement and the easier it gets to imagine how your life would look and how you would want it to look when you do actually retire. So let's assume that you are 40 years old nowadays, and at this point in your life you can afford to put aside $300 every single month and use a compound interest. So your initial investment is $300 and your monthly contribution is same $300. The length of time in years would be 20 years, so we assume that you want to retire at the age of 60, and your estimated interest rate is the same 7% per year, assuming that you invest $300 into S&P 500 every single month. We see that by the end of your investment term, you will get $150,000 in your bank account. And the graph shows us how much money you would get if you didn't use the compound interest. The sum is $72,300. And then with the compound interest, $148,744. Again, the difference is big, but it is not as big as in our previous example. So now the return will be about 2 times higher, which is definitely still worth using. The point that I'm trying to make here is that it doesn't really matter how old you are. The main rule when it comes to a compound interest is the sooner you start, the better. At the beginning of the video, I promised to talk about the disadvantages of a compound interest. Well, at the moment, I see only 2 disadvantages, and if you can think of any more disadvantages that I'm not going to mention, please comment below this video, share your thoughts with us, because I will be very interested to know what you think. So the disadvantage number 1 is time, because compound interest always takes time, and the younger you are, the harder it is to comprehend the power of the compound interest, because it seems like you will never get old, and in 20-30 years time you think life doesn't exist. You don't think about your life in 20 or 30 years. That's why people tend to get to this topic and the idea of using a compound interest at a later stage in their life, when they already don't have as much time to use all the advantages of this financial tool. The second reason that I take as a disadvantage is the fact that you are not allowed to use the returns, the profits that you receive every single year. So basically this financial tool allows you to invest and to get your returns somewhere far, somewhere at the end of your life or when you retire. But you live through your best years in the middle of your life without being able to use the profits of your compound interest. A compound interest doesn't allow you to become passive. A compound interest doesn't give you any returns that you can see every single month. You cannot take this money, go and spend it now on something that you want to buy. You remember in our first example, you were getting £70 of interest rate every single year. So you could get this £70 now and go and spend this money on something that you want to receive, something that you want to get right now. Whilst with the compound interest, you have to give up on the idea of spending this money now, and you have to completely concentrate on the future, which might not be such a bad thing, of course, but I think it is difficult and it is not always good to postpone this moment of being able to use the profits of our work or of our investments, because life is short and we don't know whether we will have these 20-30 years to invest, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So the way I do it is I invest with the compound interest the sums that I am sure I will not need in the nearest future. These are not big sums, but these are the sums that I can live comfortably without. That's it, guys. Thank you very much for your interest and for your attention today. Please click the like button to this video if you found this information interesting or useful, and consider subscribing to my channel if you want to see more of my videos that I'm going to make in the future. Thank you very much. Bye bye.